I am a Topo Androbot, created in 1983 by Nolan Bushnell, the man who helped create the Atari 2600. If you have never played the Atari 2600, you should. There are many ways to do so. Let me show you. Flashbang.
Hey, Topo.
Move your ass and make it a video. Original hardware.
The Atari 2600 came out in 1977. There have been a few variations of the classic console. I'm going to show you the original model, the legendary Heavy Sixer, a thing of beauty, tough as a tank. Depending on if his still box or has been rebuilt, these consoles can range in price. In 1986, they built an even cheaper version known as the Atari 2600 Junior. It is quite smaller than the wood grain version, but hooks up and plays the same. Honestly, I think playing on the original hardware is the best way to play the Atari. Stick in your game and your controller and you're good to go.
Other second generation console hardware.
So, starting to face competition from other consoles like Intellivision and ColecoVision, Atari released their 5200 Super System as a higher-end complementary console for their popular 2600. This thing is freaking gigantic. I have to move my camera here just to fit this beast onto the screen. Now, what they neglected to do was make this compatible with the 2600 games and controller, but they decided to make this the CX55 2600 adapter. It would fit onto the top of the 5200 so that you can stick in a 2600 game and a controller, and you're in business. The people over at Coleco with their ColecoVision decided to do the same thing, make an adapter that would play Atari's 2600 games. Here it is. It's called the Expansion Model Number 1. Same idea as the 5200, except that the ColecoVision had a port on the front of their console. The expansion model would fit in there, and then you would add a 2600 game and a controller. And there you go. But Coleco didn't stop there. They also made a standalone clone 2600 system called the Gemini Video Game System. This thing is about the same size as the Atari 2600 Junior. Stick in a 2600 game and a Gemini controller, and you're playing Atari on Coleco.
Third generation console hardware.
In 1986, Atari released the 7800's Pro System to compete with the Nintendo Entertainment System. This time, they made their system backwards compatible so you can play all the 2600 games.
Plug and play sets.
In later years, after the 2600's production run ended, plug-and-plays were sold on the market. These sets were basically 10 or so games that only needed a controller that plugged directly into the back of your TV. Here's an example. This is a paddle controller plug-and-play. It's a quality controller, but it's quite limited in the games you can play.
Modern hardware.
There is a company called HyperCan making quality consoles that can play Atari 2600 games. You also have the option of loading games onto the system using an SD card. It has a 9-pin connector for the controllers, so you can use old controllers or HyperCan's modern take on the classic controllers. As you can see, in size comparison to the Atari 2600, it's quite small. It is designed to hook up to a modern TV using HDMI cables, and even though this game is emulating the data on the cartridges, it's nice to have the old-time feeling of sticking in a game to play. Starting in 2004 to 2011, Atari produced a series of consoles with built-in games emulating their classic titles. Since 2011 to present, AtGames, under license from Atari, continues to sell their products. Each iteration of the console continues to add more games to the system. Unfortunately, you cannot add games onto the system, but they have a lot of quality titles. Another way to play Atari is on a Raspberry Pi. It is a series of small, single-board computers that can be used for different projects, one of them being video game emulation. This hardware is quite powerful and can easily store every single Atari game made and then some. As you can see, the technology is tiny compared to the 2600 Junior. The hardware is pretty cheap, and with a little know-how, you can build one from scratch. or buy a pre-made model off of the internet for a bit more.
Computer or handheld device.
If you're looking to spend no money or very little money and want to play 2600 games, one can do so on a smartphone. There are a lot of free apps that will let you play, though touch phone controls aren't the best. For a small price, you can buy a 9-penta USB converter that will let you use Atari's old controllers on your computer. Just find a site online, plug in your controller, and you're set. However, if you want to use the paddle controls on the computer, you will find the USB converter lacking. However, you can find that 2600 adapter online, which will solve your problems. It's fairly inexpensive and makes paddle controllers, amongst others, smooth as butter. So what are you waiting for? Play some Atari!
Remember, Atari games are easy to learn but hard to master. Good luck, gamer.